Welcome, soul friends. We are back with part 2 of Growing Through Pain, where we've been sharing stories and exploring some of the messiness and the muckiness of our own individual lives, but also the challenges of navigating the messiness while raising children and how we guide them through some of the messiness. So let's jump back in.
What are some other ways that we can just find an opening, when we're in the muck?
Play.
Yes. Play.
Nothing fancy or no effort required, nothing effortful, but just play. And our kids are great examples of that. Dana, you probably see Anthony just plunking away at the guitar. I see Javid with his headphones just experimenting. Meg, you see your daughter with art, your son with hockey. They just play.
I feel like yes, I see him. I think that's an example we set though. I'm a goofy one. He came home the other night and I was just trying to move some energy. So I was dancing and shaking in the kitchen while I was cooking dinner. And so just these ideas of not taking ourselves so seriously and being as grown ups, we're living with enough seriousness in this world that we have.
Exactly.
So can we just let go and be free? That dancing as if no one is watching you kind of idea, but be able to be that way anywhere.
Yes. Yeah. I have found the liberation of midlife to be just me playing. It's been so liberating. And I'm just like you, Dana, dancing in the kitchen. I'm more goofy now than I was even as a teenager. The goof factor is off the charts and I love it. And my kids love it too. Sometimes it's annoying to them.
Yes.
If it's a lot, but actually I'll check in with them. I'll kind of feel them energetically to see if they're receptive to it. And most times they are, because they love seeing the new version of me, the more unattached. And because of that, I'm actually more present with them and really interested and curious in their lives, genuinely, where I'm not bringing anything in from my container. I'm just totally there to be a witness to theirs, and they love that. And it gives so much permission for authenticity to flow through.
I feel like that always reminds me of these feelings of freedom. And we hear it a lot in society that we're looking, we put goals down or intentions out. I want more freedom. And I always like to think about when we talk about stuff like that, freedom is a feeling within. This isn't something that's out there. And so all these things that we're talking about here are, like you said, that comes from that freedom to express exactly who you are. And I think our kids' generations, I think we talked about this maybe a little bit on a previous episode, they don't have the same hangups that our generation came up with. Right. And so I feel like we're liberating ourselves and going to this freedom that they've actually already got. Yeah. And that's beautiful. They'll have their own challenges that, will come up, but definitely different generation.
And they'll have tools. I think modeling, showing them that you're never too old to learn something new. You're never too old to dance in the kitchen. Yep. You're never too old to laugh at yourself. It's just modeling that behavior for them so that, when life does throw all these curveballs, that they've got some tools.
And it's not all seriousness.
Yeah, I think what we are really gifting our children is modeling permission for expression exactly as it is in the moment. And they may have seen me more serious in previous years, but that was a stage of life thing. And now this is a different stage of life for me now, and they see less seriousness. And it's almost like I'm modeled, there's a time and place for everything. And however it shows up in your life is totally okay.
Beautiful.
To embrace reality as it is. As it was and as it is, and then use your curiosity to create new possibility from there, because then we're no longer kind of fighting with the past or what was or what happened. It just
I love that point.
I do too. And I feel like it's a good reminder too on this, like, and we have touched on this before, the expectations we put on ourselves of when we're supposed to achieve certain things. 50 was a reflective year for sure. And I found myself leading up to my 50th, instead of focusing on all the amazing things that I've actually accomplished and done and people I've met in this lifetime so far, I focused initially on what I hadn't achieved, especially as a milestone birthday. And so I found it really, really challenging leading up to. And then it was almost like the day of, I had a really great cry. It was a guttural cry in the forest. And I came out the other side and organically started to recognize all of the things that I have accomplished and the beautiful things and the beautiful experiences and these things that I'd had. And that's a really powerful moment when we can really start to say, like, okay, I haven't achieved this yet by this age, which I thought society was going to have me. I was going to have the, like, I don't know, it wasn't a house or a car. I have kind of that, but like the relationship for me. So I've had relationships, I've been married, but at 50, I'm a single woman in my midlife. And so that's a very different expectation that I would have grown up with. So the reflective piece going back is like, well, you know what? As a single person, I've experienced amazing experiences on my own that's helped me to really grow, that somebody else that's been in a committed relationship for the last 30 years hasn't had. I need to flip my own script a little bit, and those expectations of when I would achieve certain things. We've talked a little about the self-love piece too. I remember going through that in my 40s and going, why? I'm 40 something and I don't love myself. Like, this should have been a no-brainer from the time I was young. But it took me until middle age to actually really, really love myself. So letting go of the timeline on our journeys, because some people might experience that at that young age. Others, 50, 70, 80, 90,
Oh, yeah.
There's no limit, right?
There's no limit. Well said. So true.
So true. And I would say also, again, learning to love yourself, it takes time. And a lot of that is because of how you feel, right? And maybe how you feel is in your place in the world, how you've been treated, what people have said, what they haven't said. So it takes time, I think, to love ourselves. And I think the journey leads us to where we are for us, and in this space is not looking outward for love.
That's right. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Not looking. I think that was my biggest learning, was that it feels so good to be loved by others, right? But if I only if I only seek it from external places and people, then will I ever truly feel it for myself?
That's right. So true. Yeah.
And how hard is that for our younger generations that are growing up based on likes and dislikes? And I mean, we had aspects of that, but this is like social media is all driven on, and it's all about, what you look like or what you're doing, what you're not doing. And it's a high level of comparison at a low cognitive age of really being able to understand what that means.
The worth attached to social media likes is scary. In my field, I foresee a huge need for support through the anxiousness that's created by that, the high anxiety that's created by that.
I see it too, Eilina. We are just at the beginning of the effects on our nervous system, on our self-worth, our self-love. Like, are you seeing that? Are you seeing that in your line of work? Is it coming? Is it just rising, becoming more?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point that we're just seeing the beginning of it, because it's still new enough that it's creating a new-ish pattern of self-worth based on an external, extrinsic evaluation piece. It's completely outside of people's control and outside of their own awareness, the social media validation of your existence, really.
Exactly.
It's actioning behind the scenes, right? Like the slow build, right?
Yes. And I mean, not to get too deep into it because it could really take us down a rabbit hole, but it's built on a monetary model to perpetuate young people buying into, like, their purchasing power, basically.
Manipulations
Oh my goodness.
of the authority, the man.
all of that.
I'm just going off. Don't mind me.
All of that, and what I see as scary, and I guess each generation has its markers of challenge, right? Like the baby boomer generation came out of a war, and the Gen X, a lot of us were latchkey kids, parents with double income, emotional unavailability with the parents because of lack of attunement, and millennials, and then the Gen Z. But I think the validation of their existence based on an extrinsic structure that they have no power over puts them at a very vulnerable place. So that might be their Achilles heel of that generation, like our kids.
What we've been going through as a family with my daughter recently, there was one part of the problem was a situation that arose online. And what we have come to learn is that because kids are getting online and onto TikTok and onto all the things at 5 and 6 and 7 years old, they just don't have, they're not equipped to understand the world that they're in. And they think what they see is how it is. And they don't actually realize that some of the things that they're doing are wrong and they are causing pain. Like, for example, it can be called casual prejudice.
Yes.
It can be called peer aggression. These are terms they are not part of my everyday, but I've learned about them, and they are the beginning. They can be linked to criminal activity. And our youth are very vulnerable.
Can I clarify that you said that some of these activities can be linked to criminal behavior? So this is the starting. Yes. This is the seed starting.
The seed. Yeah. Maybe the nugget is to be aware. Be aware of what your kids are doing and how they're learning from what they're seeing online.
And you're right. It has to be modeled. That awareness piece is like, if you're not trying to be a conscious parent and be aware and involved in your kids too. Limiting too, like some of the, I love all my clients, but I see some really great conscious parenting happening and how they reduce some of the usage of the iPads and the different technologies. And then of course we see the other juxtaposition. And I definitely, I used Teletubbies when my son was young for a babysitter sometimes too. We all do that, but we have to recognize that these are not to replace human interaction as far as learning tools for our kids. We can think even some of the games on the iPad, they're developing intelligence, or intellect, I should say, because again, the more we go into the intellect, the further we go away from the natural intelligence, which is the heart center. So they're learning to be really, really freaking smart, but they're getting further and further away from what their soul and their heart knows to be right and wrong. Not that I want to use right and wrong, because I feel like we all do the best with what we know, but it's an easy thing for our listeners to kind of identify with, right?
Connection is a skill. Relatability is a skill. Yes. And it's a learned skill, and it's a modeled skill. And what Megan shared there had me think of that book that we all had to study in school, Lord of the Flies. Remember that one?
Yes.
And how when the kids are left to their own devices, they become a little wild tribal, like it goes back to our tribal
hive mind.
Hive mind, yeah. What is it called when humans eat other humans? I forget what that term is. I have
cannibalism.
A brain fart there.
Cannibalism.
Yeah, it goes back to that cannibalism, like the energy of like eating each other for survival because there's not the relatability skills or a community coming together to create safe infrastructure,
Yes.
And so our kids left to their own devices are very vulnerable to that kind of chaotic, cannibalistic energy that, in the absence of conscious parenting, involved parenting. A conscious can sometimes be a loaded word, because if a parent is involved, that's conscious. You know, if they're present, that's the greatest gift we can give our child, really, more than anything else. Yeah, just presence
and listening.
Well, I think you're right too. If we think about the aspects that this hive mind and this group thinking can bring about, you know, if we look at things that like war, for example, a singular person will very rarely, you know, pick a fight with another person when they're kind of in their own devices. But you add a couple of friends together in that situation, and there's this they lose all sense of autonomy. So if we bring that back to a parenting perspective, if the children are getting, you know, involved parenting on a one-on-one basis, they have a better chance of going into a hive mind and maybe stepping out of that situation versus getting involved and all of a sudden having done something that they weren't ever thinking they would do. And they got caught up with their friends and they did it. And then everybody's reeling because the parent goes, this isn't my child. And well, it is your child, but they got caught up in something. So it's where we do those things that aren't part of our natural nature.
My partner gives a great example of young men getting together, because he was one of those young men, you know, hive mind. But when young men get together, they share one brain, is what he says. They share one brain. And it can be a little scary. And this is how we grow up, you know. It's like, this is how we share one brain. We make some mistakes, and we're like, oh, right, autonomy, right.
I have personal choice in that matter.
Personal responsibility. Responsibility. Like, oh, huge. Yeah.
I have so much compassion for the youth, right? Because they're still learning. And so there is a responsibility of a parent or a caregiver to be witnessing and to be engaged enough to provide solutions if there is a little bit of trouble that comes up as a result of this learning.
I'd love you guys to maybe share with our listeners how you've cultivated some of that openness with your children so that they actually share, because we know a lot of our kids, like, you know, aside from little, you know, the leftover lunch bags that happen in the backpacks and stuff like that, a lot of our kids don't share with us of what's going on in their lives. So how have you guys cultivated that kind of a relationship with your children, so when they are experiencing something, they feel safe enough to come to you with that?
Great question. These, let's just call them breakdown moments. If our kids share one brain and have a mistake happen, right? Or some kind of a accident or hiccup happen, those are actually, I find, great opportunities for practicing critical thinking. So, like, those are the conversations I have had with my kids, where we reflect on what happened and what happened inside of themselves when that was happening. And then they get to be curious about what was going on inside of them. Because in that moment, there was perhaps not a presence inside of them. They were in that one brain moment, right? I've practiced with my kids these, like, kind of getting attuned to your own internal environment when they didn't think there was one in that moment. And so that practice creates space, and it just looks like a conversation after the event, reflecting on it. And I've had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of those kinds of conversations with my boys, because boys can be very different from girls. My boys particularly very action orientated, one in particular.
Yes.
So, and I noticed they were more comfortable, especially one of mine is more comfortable talking while moving.
Yes, so that's very common with boys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Get them moving, distracted.
With my kids, it relates to what Eileen was saying. When there's an event that creates, you know, an upset in their system, I think what I have learned to do is to give them permission to have that feeling. And so I give them space. And in that moment, it might look like for my son, he might go shoot hockey pucks. My daughter will draw. It's giving them time to feel into their feelings and not try to fix it. And then we come when things are more settled and they're feeling more safe and more calm, then we have a conversation like Eilina was saying, and we can look at what was going on for them. We try to dig a little deeper into what it was that really bothered them. Then we sit and we talk about it. And that is where I think the openness, because they trust that they have a voice.
When you've given them space for their nervous system to use their own individual tools to kind of bring their nervous system back into rest and digest, which is beautiful in that combination of like giving them the space and then having that reflective time to conversate. Because I think as parents, there's often that engagement piece. If we're dysregulated in our own life, we're going to go after that conversation and force it right after the incident, because that's what we do with pets, right? We discipline them in the moment because they won't remember. But like at your children's ages, especially Megan and older, like give them the chance to process on their own and then have the conversations is really powerful skill building for them.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, like, you know, you've mentioned this, both of you have mentioned this in safe ways. I just want to highlight giving them that space to process, but in a safe way and in a safe place. So that looks like being at home for my kids. So, you know, they're in the back lane shooting pucks or shooting hoops, or it's downstairs in the art room or in their bedroom having time to process. And then we come together. So it is important, you know, to probably note that they need, for me, I think it's healthy for them to have a space to process on their own first, but in a safe way.
Yeah.
Both my sons, one in particular, has shared that because we've moved a lot in our last 9 years since my divorce, California and then Canada and California again, and then back to Canada again, so back and forth, that for them home is when the three of us are together with a dog, because the dog is part of the family. And the feeling of just the togetherness is a safety piece for them. And you just reminded me of a really lovely memory that I'll share. Just this New Year's, you know, my eldest is 24 and a man, like, you know, just like your son is a man, Dana. These are men. And it was just before midnight, I think, and we were all getting ready to cheers. And I was sitting back on the couch and we were with friends, and he came along and just rested his head down on my lap, and I was scratching his head. And my friend came along and she was like, "Oh, that's so sweet." And he's like, "This is my safe place. This is my safe place."
So
and
beautiful.
It was just so like, oh, that's fulfillment for me in life, is that they go out, they do their thing in the world, they're adults, and they have a place of safety wherever they make it, and practice it. And then they go back out to the dangerous world and then they come back in, and that place is found equally and primarily within themselves.
So beautiful.
I love hearing that, because my son is going to be 13. And so when he's 24, I hope he, you know, like Ant's age as well, Dana, I hope that I know Anthony feels that way. So I hope my son also feels that way.
We talked a lot in today's episode about parenting and some of the challenges that we face along the journey as both parent and child. So we'll wrap up today's episode with a quote by Dr. Shefali. "The parenting journey holds the potential to be a spiritually regenerative experience for both parent and child, where every moment is a meeting of spirits, and both parent and child appreciate that each dances on a spiritual path that's unique, holding hands, and yet alone."
Thanks for tuning into SoulNet, everyone. If you liked what you heard on today's episode, please follow, like, and share on your favorite platforms. If you have questions or topics you'd like covered on our podcast, please email us at soulnetsisters@gmail.com.